WFMU Radio. And we are here live on the Passaic River, New Jersey, in the town of Kearney. And the first time I ever heard about Kearney, I was listening to the Glenn Jones Show, and I heard this man here, X-Ray Burns, talking about it, and I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Is he talking about Kearney, like the people who run off and join the circus or whatever? And instead, it was this town. So you X-Ray Burns from WFMU, you live right near here. Were you born here too?
I was born in Kearney, West Hudson Hospital, and very proud to be from Kearney. We are, in fact, a special breed. And I am proud to say that, except for a small period in 1980, I have never lived more than 200 yards from the banks of the mighty Passaic River.
That was when you were doing a little stint in upstate?
Essentially, yes. I did leave for college. There was some incarceration.
Yeah. Going back in time to the river itself, the Passaic, how dirty was it when you were a kid growing up here? What was the state of the Passaic? I've heard some crazy stories.
It was very dirty. And I mean, I didn't know it any other way because it had been that way since I was born. But if you look across the river here...
Let me get this mic a little closer to you there.
If you look across the river here at a lot of these little outlets that you referred to as Satan's urethra before, they were always flowing with fluids and sludge and brightly colored fluids of every kind, which kind of made it nice. As a child, you'd think, oh, look at that, isn't that nice? Just don't get any on your face, you know. And we all knew from a very, very young age that if you went down to the river, nothing good was going to come of it. You were either going to get hurt or end up in trouble with the law.
And then what about like all of the sort of the pollutants that were in there? People weren't as aware of things back in those days as they are now.
This was before they realized the consequences of the manufacture of dioxin and a lot of these other chemicals that at the time we assumed were going to make our lives better. And they just didn't think far ahead to see what the residue would cause. And I mean, it's been birth defects have been attributed to it. It not only stays in the river and in the silt, but it leaches into the soil and into the water table in general. But at the time, we thought it was great. You know, Newark was a hotbed of industry, and one of the largest manufacturers of Agent Orange was the Diamond Shamrock Company, which is just about 3 miles from here.
Really?
Yeah, around the bend of the river in Newark. Agent Orange was a defoliant, produced widespread production for use in the Vietnam War. I was always more of a fan of Agent Grape myself. But they just didn't realize it. And to this day, you can't go onto the grounds of the old Diamond Shamrock facility because it's just in the soil, it's in the sludge in the river, which you have to dredge up. Once you dredge it up, it's so toxic, they have nowhere to put it. So they have to burn it, but you can't burn it because that releases it into the air. So, I mean, they're paying for indiscretions or lack of foresight, call it what you will.
Yeah.
And this is the early 60s. You know, then it was all about making the money at the time.
Yeah.
And you can see me. I've been living by the banks of the Passaic all these many years, and I hardly have any lumps growing out of my head or unsightly disfigurements.
Well, X-Ray Burns, sitting to your left is Wheeler there, who actually I think has interviewed you for New Jersey at one stage. But he's known for taking his canoe on the Passaic and just sort of traveling all over, exploring. Have you ever gone out in a boat?
As you can see, again, once again, by looking at me, I'm sure you're well aware that I consider myself somewhat of an athlete. Yes. And I did do some rowing for the Kearney crew team in 1977.
Okay.
And I was terrified. These cruise shells, they look so sleek and speedy. When you see them in the water, you don't realize when you sit in a cruise shell, you're only 2 inches out of the water.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not afraid of water. I'm not generally afraid of many things. But when you're out there strapped into this thing in the cold, cold winter and the mighty Passaic, it humbles a man. You know, a guy like Wheeler, who knows what's going through his head, but he's kind of a different breed. I'm not getting out there in a canoe, even if it has a skull and crossbones painted on it.
X-Ray Burns, growing up here as a kid, you spent a lot of time down here by the Passaic. Well, what kind of animals have you seen? Because like just in my 2 trips, I've seen quite a few interesting creatures.
We have mice, rats, raccoons, possums, and I mean possums the likes of like the size of dogs. And I live, again, just off the banks of the Passaic up here now. And when they don't summer at the banks of the river, they all come up and spend the winter in my backyard, apparently, and in my tool shed. But I have my trusty hounds to keep them away. But you see lots and lots of things. Snakes. One thing I've noticed that when I was a kid, we'd come down and we would catch frogs. That was the big thing. Let's go down by the Passaic and slip and slide on the rocks in the mud and see what kind of frogs we could catch. I don't see them anymore. I don't see any frogs or toads. I don't know if that has to do with some change in the environment.
They say amphibians are the first to feel it.
You got to watch those amphibians.
Yeah.
You never know if they're going to be in the water or on the land. That's what makes them tricky. That's right.
Yeah.
I never trust anybody with webbed fingers unless they're from Kearney, which many of them are, as it turns out.
I believe that.
Although webbed feet would serve you better in this particular milieu. And there was a lady or a family that lived on this barge. And we were fascinated. As children, we would go down and we'd throw rocks at the boat. You know, whenever we were fascinated with anything, we'd throw rocks at it. And it seems to me that I recall the family had moved on, and there was a lady living by herself on the barge who passed on, I would say, in the late 70s. Somewhere in the 80s, apparently the barge caught fire and burned. And in the late 80s, early 90s, the town of Kearney actually had a dredging unit come in to sort of dig the bones of the barge out of the muck and the silt. But the barge remained there for quite some time. So you might want to ask Mr. Rapp about that, because I'd be curious to hear. He just gave me the bare bones, but I believe he knew the family.
I think, he said his mom knew the family.
Yeah. Don't tell him I threw rocks at the people, please. Okay.
And actually, he was telling me Mr. Rapp was telling me that there was a tugboat upstream that served as a bar, a drinking place,
nice,
a pub. And I guess in the old days, people would get in their boat. Before Route 21 was here, apparently that was where all the like the ice cream stand and the restaurants and whatever were over there, and they would just hop in their little boat and they'd go upstream and get a drink and then hop in their boat and go back downstream. You know?
These days they frown on that sort of thing.
They sure do.
You have to go out beyond the 12-mile limit where they held the Tyson Secretariat fight.
That's right. Otherwise you get the DUI.
That's right.
Yeah.
He built a kayak once in the backyard on Hickory Street and took it down to the Passaic River. And I said, well, what happened? So she didn't remember. So she called Uncle Archie down in Arkansas, and apparently he built this kayak, him and his pal, out of paper. And they just kept covering it with paint and dope, you know, to make a fabric. And my grandfather disapproved, said, you're not taking that out in the river. But they completed the kayak, took it right up the road here where the bridge is today, put it in the water, and the both of them got in, and they were immediately like sucked downstream like a mile and a half. At which point my grandfather followed them in the car, and when they made it to shore in what is today East Newark, he said, are you all right? They said yes, and he immediately stomped the kayak to bits with his feet.
He was right. Boating out here is no joke, man. You know, you don't want your kids taking their lives in their hands.
Yeah, but there was a day, Wheeler, and you're all whacked out, man. You're out there in a canoe all the time, and you're going to tell everybody else not to do it? I mean, God bless you. I'm not going out there. I mean, you know, maybe if you're running the show, I'll go out there, but I'm not going out there. But that's what kids do. And, you know, that goes part of the mystique when you grow up in a town that has a river running through it. And I was never so brave as to actually go out on it, but it was always a source of mystery. And we would come down and play on the rocks. You would find, you know, contraceptive devices, and you didn't even know what they were when you found them. You would find beer bottles and dirty magazines and half-smoked marijuana cigarettes and other such contraband.
And I guess if I had one question to ask you, it would be...
What's on your neck?
No. How many times you grew up here, how many times do you think that you've driven over the Passaic River?
Oh, countless times, just in one day. And not counting the times we walked across this bridge back here to buy bags of bad things. I would say, in my life, how many times?
Yeah.
Well, I'm good for 30 times a week right now. Billions and billions of times. To paraphrase the great Carl Sagan, billions and billions.
I believe it, because it's really hard to drive around here and not go over the Passaic River.
I love the smells. I love the bridge. I love the occasional boat that goes by. Of course, I'm easily fascinated. I even staring at the shiny buttons on Mark's shirt. But it's always been a source of fascination and a source of joy to me. And I think it's absolutely great that you're drawing attention to it.
I myself love Kearney and the whole surrounding area, Newark, East Newark, all these old neighborhoods, and to see what they've become, they're still beautiful the way they are. They're not what they once were, but they're still gorgeous to me.
Like I get very short of breath. Like I almost thought I was having a heart attack, but then I noticed it happens every night.
Yeah.
So I
hate the gin hangovers.
I seldom get I get more of a hangover from this because of the sugar.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine pointed out to me that gin is the only booze that has juniper in it.
Yeah. And it's juniper.
A lot of people have juniper allergies. So maybe when I drink the gin, I have some type of respiratory allergy.
Look, gin was more akin to like white lightning than refined liquor.
Yeah, but they flavor it with
they
juniper
flavor it with
berries.
aromatics and what's the term?
Boil an old shoe in it.